If you're rocking the latest 9000 series AM5 processor like the 9950X, or the best gaming CPU, the 9800X3D, and you're looking for a nice white aesthetic board to complement your all-white build, then definitely check out the MSI MPG B850 HTI Wi-Fi, which is a beautiful white board. Now, if you guys seen my previous video, I did do the X870E version for my Vision compact builds, but as promised, I'll be showing you guys this beautiful MPG B850, which is more cost effective than the X870E version, and I'll be dropping it on my white H9 Elite build with, of course, the 9800X3D. For RAM, I'll be going for the 64GB Trident Z5 Neo RGB CL30 6000 mega transfers. Now, another great thing to know about the B850 is that they are 9000 ready, which means you don't have to update any type of BIOS. It is ready to go the moment you drop in any 9000 series CPU, which makes it very easy. So let's go ahead and pop this open. I'm really excited to see how this is gonna look. And as always, we have anti-static bag to protect it. All right, let's go ahead and reveal it. All right, and there we have it, guys, the HTI B850. This board definitely looks fire. Alright, and I think that's pretty much it here. But what do you guys think about the design of this board? I think it looks really nice. Now, this MSI motherboard uses a 14+2+1 do-it rail power system to give you awesome power delivery to your AM5 processor. Take a look on the left here. We have all of our IR ports. Starting with the top left here, we have a flash BIOS button, and we also have a clear CMOS button. I absolutely love seeing this feature here, especially at this price point. We also get a dedicated HDMI 2.1 port that gets connected directly to your CPU's integrated graphics. Now, we do get 3 USB-C ports here at a max of 10 gigabits per second. Now, you have a total of 7 USB-A ports. Now, only 2 of them will support 10 gigs, which are coded in red. The blue one's going to be up to 5 gigs. And then we get 4 USB 2.0. Now, moving along, we get an awesome 5 gig Ethernet port, standard Wi-Fi 7 here. We get an SPDIF out, microphone in, and we also have our line out port. Overall, you're getting a decent amount of ports here, and I absolutely love that clear CMOS button, which is awesome. Another great thing about this board is that you get this little LED display right over here, where will show you different numerical codes, letting you know exactly what's going on with your motherboard during boot up, which is really nice. All right, so here I have both Edge TI Wi-Fi motherboards, with one of them being an X870E and the other being a B850. Now, it's really hard to tell right off the bat the key differences between the two because they look almost identical, and the price that separates both of them is about $70. Now, if you want to know which one was which, then of course the one on the left is going to be the X870E version, and on the one on the right is going to be the B850. Now, visually, the only cues that you could tell is going to be on the Gen 5 slots here. You'll notice that the silver on this has a shinier, more polished design that makes it look more premium, with this one being more solid. Another visual cue would be the M.2 heatsink cover over here. You'll notice over here we have no screws at all, whereas over here we have screws. Now, both of these will have the push and lift easy system over here, which is very convenient. However, on the X870E, the additional M.2 slots will feature that push and lift mechanism, whereas on the B850 you are going to need a screwdriver to screw that in. Again, you know, it's not much of a huge issue, but I do love the fact that this one has more DIY friendly stuff here. Now, I like the fact that both of these do have the LED indicators here to troubleshoot, and when it comes to the powering system here, they both have the same powering system, 14+2+1. Now, outside of that, the biggest difference is going to be on the left side, which is going to be on the IO port portion. So I'm going to lift these both up here. And this is where you're going to have the biggest differentiating factor in deciding which board is right for you. On the X870E, you have more ports, higher specs versus the B850. Now, even though both of these have 3 USB-C each, the major difference between the X870E is that we have dual USB 4 slots. So these are rated at 40 gigabits per second, whereas these 3 USB-Cs are limited to only 10 gigs. So really it's going to come down to the amount of ports that you need, the type of features. All right, now we're ready to set up our motherboard here. Now, whenever you work on your motherboard, my biggest recommendation is to pull up the user manual. Now, unfortunately, we don't get the actual manual inside the packaging, so you will have to pull it up on MSI's website. That way you can reference the manual at any time, and I'll be referencing this as well. All right, the very first thing we're going to do is install our CPU. I'll also be installing the CPU contact frame, which is completely optional. You don't need this, but I'll be showing you both ways. First things first, let's have our CPU on standby. Keep this locked in the plastic. And all we have to do to install the CPU on this board, you'll notice this little latch here that we just have to push down, move to the right, bring this latch all the way back. Then you can lift the CPU cover. Next, we want to open up our CPU here and be very careful and gentle. If you guys have seen the previous video, I dropped my 9950X. First time I ever dropped a CPU. So, never making that mistake again. Alright, so whenever you're holding a CPU, just make sure you're holding it by its side. And with any AM5 processor, you'll notice a yellow triangle on the top left, which will definitely match up our CPU socket here. And then you'll also notice these two notches right on the top and right on the bottom, which also align with these little notches right here as well. So with that out of the way, gently lower it down and go ahead and place it on top. I like to position the left side first and gently drop it down just like that. And then just give it a little tug, making sure that the notches line up perfectly. We drop this cover down. And then with the latch, we're going to bring this latch all the way down. Now keep in mind that there is resistance when you're pushing it down, so just make sure you push it all the way down. Then you can just remove this little cover here. And that's pretty much it here. You have your CPU successfully installed. However, I'll be installing this CPU contact frame. So if you don't want this, you can definitely skip this step. Alright, so in order for us to install the CPU contact frame, all we have to do is push this down to the right again to remove the pressure of the original retention. Now in the box of the CPU contact frame, you got this little Allen wrench so you can unscrew the original CPU contact. However, I do have the bit for my precision screwdriver, so I'll be using this instead. And you're also gonna get 4 screws that we are gonna replace. Unscrew these 4 screws. And before we do that, if you wanna take extra precautionary measures, you could always replace this cover. Now I will mention that these screws don't go all the way out, so just loosen them up completely. Now that we have all of this loose, if you take a quick look here, all we have to do is just carefully lift it up. So I like to grab the top piece and the latch and just lift it up. And that comes off completely. And then I recommend you store this just in case. All right, now we're ready to drop in the contact frame. Now keep in mind that you are gonna need your CPU in the socket first. And then all we have to do is drop the contact frame right on top, and it fits just like a puzzle. Just like that. Then we take the 4 screws and we screw all 4 of these in. And just like that, we have it successfully installed. Now, I personally love using the contact frame, and they also come in different colors. They also come in red, which I've used a lot, but I think this black goes very well with the whole board. All right, so since we're still around the CPU, the next step here is to prep up whatever cooling method you're going to use. Now, most of you guys will probably be using AIOs, and in this section, you definitely want to follow whichever AIO you're using. You want to follow their own specific instructions. I'll be using the Artec Freezer 3 360 AIO, which has a bracket system. Now, every AIO is different. Some of them use brackets, some of them use specific standoffs. Just follow the directions. However, most of the times you're gonna have to remove these original pieces here that are usually for air coolers. So all I have to do is unscrew each of these screws, which takes a standard Phillips head. All right, with those 4 screws out of the way, we can now remove these 2 plastic pieces, and you can store this just in case. If you guys are using the same AIO that I'm using, then it calls for these standoffs that go right over the 4 screw holes here, and then we put these brackets that are labeled L for left and R for right. All right, now that we have that installed, our AIO is prepared to be installed. Before we go for that, let's go ahead and work on the other components. All right, next step here, we're going to install the Trident Z5 Neo RGB RAM sticks here, and they're going to go on this section right over here. Now it's important to know how they're labeled. Starting with the left, it's labeled A1, A2, the third one is going to be B1, and then the last one is going to be B2. Depending on how many RAM sticks you decide to put in, if you're just going to use just 1 RAM stick, make sure you populate A2. If you're going to use 2, you want to populate A2 and B2. And finally, if you're going to be using 4, you would basically just populate each one of these DIMM slots. Now, since we were working with just 2, all I have to do is push these latches down. So you have A2 and then B2. And this motherboard here also has an additional latch on the bottom as well. So same thing, A2 and B2. And finally, whenever you're installing RAM, you always want to line up the notches here. As you can see, this does not match up, but if I flip it over, it matches perfectly, and you want to pay attention to this little silver line. Slide it in. Okay, let it drop a little bit. And me personally, I like to just apply pressure twice, so 1 down, and then the other one up. And you hear 2 nice clicks. Same thing here. Make sure we match it up. Slide it in. 1 and 2. And with that, we have the RAM successfully installed. which looks really nice because this does have like some black edges here and it goes with the black elements on this board. All right, next up here is installing our NVMe SSDs. Now I'll be installing two. One of them is going to be the 990 Evo Plus and the other one is going to be just a simple PCIe Gen 3 SSD just for the purpose of this video. Now before we install our NVMe's, it's important to know and understand each of these slots here. Now the B850 comes with 4 M.2 slots. Two of them is going to be PCIe 5.0, which connect directly to the CPU. And then the last two are going to be PCIe 4.0, which connects to the chipset and then routed to the CPU. Now, if you reference the manual here, one of the great things about this board here is the fact that if you populate any of these M.2 slots, it's not going to touch the full bandwidth of your main PCIe GPU lane slot, which is X16. The only reduction that I see so far in this manual is that on the third PCIe slot, which is going to be this one right over here, we'll run at X2 if you populate the third slot over here. But other than that, you don't have to worry about your main X16 slot being touched at all. Now, for those of you that are going to install more than one NVMe, you are going to need a screwdriver, of course, to remove these heatsink covers over here. But thankfully, the primary one has that easy push and lift. So you just push it and then you lift it up and then you have the heatsink exposed, which is very convenient. And for this heatsink cover here, we have a total of 4 screws. All right, so this heatsink cover houses 2 M.2s. And then for the final one, we have this in the bottom over here. So same thing, you have 2 screws. And again, this is going to be the final one. All right, so for your main drive, I highly recommend your main drive being the best one. On the main slot here, we're going to have a sticker that we are going to have to remove. The main slot is the only one that has a thermal pad. So if you are going to populate a Gen 5, then this one will have the better cooling performance. Now with your M.2, you're going to notice this little notch right over here. Now you are going to match up with this little notch over here, and you generally just put it in an angle and you just push it in, push it all the way down. You're going to see this little silver button looking thing. You just press it down and it just latches completely. So that portion over there is very easy, and if you ever want to remove it, you just push this little dot to the back and that's pretty much it. I like how the main drive is very convenient. Now when it comes to the secondary drive, I can definitely use the second slot, which directly connects to the CPU for the best, most optimal performance. And again, it supports up to PCIe Gen 5. Or if you wanted to populate these, you definitely can. Just know that it is max Gen 4. So I'll be applying the second one right over here. Now with this specific board, we don't have all of the easy features like you see on the X870Es. So for this, you do have to push all the way down, and then to lock it, you are gonna have to kind of like just turn this to the right side. So that way this black piece holds the M.2 in place. And if you ever wanna remove it, you just have to just move it to the left where the black piece no longer holds it down. And that's pretty much it. So once again, just push it down. Now it does temporarily lock it in place. And then to fully lock it, you just push this to the right. And that's pretty much it. And you're gonna do the same thing for the third and fourth slot if you're going to use those. All right, now you're ready to put the heatsink covers back. Now make sure you turn them around and you remove this little sticker over here, which will reveal the thermal pad. And all we have to do is just angle this in into this part right over here, and it's really easy to install. And then you just click it. And then for the next heatsink cover, just make sure you rotate it around. Make sure you remove the sticker that you're putting the M.2. Since I have just one on the top, I want to make sure I remove the top. Now we just place it back in. Now unfortunately we don't have the same push and lift mechanism here. That's where the X870E has more DIY friendlier options. So we are going to have to screw these in. All right, and the last cover, of course, if you have one, and make sure you put the bottom heatsink wall. And if you're only working with just one M.2, then your main one's going to be very easy to just install. All right, with that out of the way, we're now ready to install this on our case. All right, so before dropping your motherboard on your case, my recommendation is to lay your case flat for it to be as easy as possible. Now your motherboard has 9 screw openings, which will align with all these 9 screw holes, with the exception of the H9 Elite having this middle one more like a standoff, so there's no screws that can go on here. Every case would be different, but they all generally follow the same 9 screw pattern. So let's go ahead and grab your motherboard here, and you definitely want to be very careful when you're dropping it. I like to stick my left hand inside the IO port over here so that as I'm dropping it, I can kind of grab it as well and lift it down. Now before I proceed, some have mentioned that they don't really like this clear transparency that's covering part of the Dragon logo over here. My only thing with this is that I think this is probably meant to protect the RGB elements, because this logo goes really deep inside, where other RGB elements are usually more on this side over here. So I want to say it's definitely more of a protective measure. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and slowly start positioning it. A little bit more difficult for me because I have all these cables in the way. All right, so we have that dropped in very nicely. And now you're gonna grab your motherboard screws. Now these screws should be found in your PC case hardware. Now in my scenario over here, I'm gonna be using 8 screws in total. Now for a lot of cases, you'll probably need the 9 screws, but if you wanna access the last one, this heatsink over here does cover that final hole in the middle. So the good thing is that since this is a push and lift, I can just lift this up and expose that additional screw hole over here. But since the H990 treats this more as a standoff instead of a screw hole here, it basically kind of holds the motherboard in place. So I don't really need to screw a 9th screw, but again, depending on your case, you may need all 9 screws like I did with my Vision compact case. So with the exception of that one, we're gonna go ahead and screw all around. All right, so we have all those 8 screws in, with the middle one, of course, being the standoff, so I don't have to screw that one in. So now the next step here, either to install the AIO on top or connect all of these cables. Now, because I'm using the Arctic Freezer 360 AIO, it's such a thick radiator that it makes it very hard to connect these top cables here. So what I'm going to do, just for this scenario, is to connect my CPU cables first, and then I'll place the AIO on top so that it goes in smoother. So whenever you're connecting these cables for the CPU, this motherboard takes 2 8-pin connectors over here. Grab these 2 cables labeled CPU, of course. It's going to be on your PSU. And you just want to connect each one. I think the left one would be easier to plug in first. You're going to hear a nice click. And then for the second one. All right, so we have both of these installed. And I'm just going to start tucking these wires as close to the corner as possible, because this radiator is such a thick radiator and I have experience before. So, and then I'll position the radiator on top, install the pump, and then we'll work with all of these other cables after. All right, we're back, and as you can see, I have the Arctic on here. It's not fully in since I'm gonna need to maneuver it to connect all of the other cables. But as you see, as I pull this in, you'll notice that I have barely any space for the CPU connectors here, which is why I decided to plug this in first. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is install the AIO pump on top of the CPU, and then we'll connect all the cables that we need to connect. Now, in case you have the Arctic freezer, it does come with this magnetic detachable headpiece here that we do have to take out first in order for us to install it. And again, this step is gonna highly depend on whatever AIO that you currently have. Make sure you follow the specific instructions of your specific AIO. Most of them come with pre-installed thermal paste. However, since I'm using it, I'm going to have to reapply some thermal paste on top of the CPU, which I'll be using the Arctic MX6. Now, depending on your thermal paste, they might include a spatula. However, since the Arctic MX6 has a very high viscosity, it's a thick paste, they recommend a pea-size amount or an X, which is the one that I'm going to do here. So I'm going to draw a nice little X here. Not the prettiest X, but it'll definitely do since the pressure of this will definitely spread everything out. Let's go ahead and position this and screw it in. Now, I will say that out of all the AIOs that I've installed, the Arctic is definitely the trickiest. Best way that I found was just screwing just a little bit in at a time, and you'll notice that even there it kind of came out. So all right, now that we have the pump installed, we're going to work on all of the rest of the cables here. All right, so we already connected our CPU connectors beforehand because, of course, this radiator is very thick. Now we're going to work on the rest of the cables here. Now, your AIO will most likely be the next one to tackle, and it's going to depend on your AIO and what kind of cables it has. So for the majority of AIOs, you'll have a pump header. Most of the time, they'll just be labeled pump, and they'll either be 3 pins or 4 pins. This one happens to be a 4-pin. And if you reference the motherboard over here on the top right is where all of our headers are at. We have a dedicated pump on the middle, and then we have a dedicated CPU fan and a system fan header as well. Thankfully for the pump, they make it very easy because they also have it coated in a grayish color. And they also have the names of these printed on the actual board itself if you look very closely. So for most of you guys that have the AIO, you can simply just connect this one connector right over here. However, if for whatever reason, if you have an AIO like this Arctic Freezer, you have the option of using a breakout cable that has 3 separate connectors here. One for the pump, one to control the fans, and then one to control the VRM fan as well. Because internally this does have a VRM fan, so I like to use this cable instead so I can individually control each one of these. So this is going to be the one that most of you guys are going to have. You want to pay attention to this tab right over here, and you want to match it with the tabs on the motherboard itself as well, which is going to be located more on the left side. So all we have to do here is push it right in. All right, so now that pump header is installed, and you can definitely proceed, but since I have separate connectors here, I next have fan, and then I have VRM. Now, because this fan controls these fans on top here, I'm going to put this under where it says CPU fan. And finally, for VRM, I'm going to position that under the system fan 1. And to be honest, you could probably put the VRM on the CPU fan instead. And then these fans, you can connect them to the system fan. Both of them should work perfectly fine. Right, so now I have those 3 populated. And the last thing here, this AIO specifically also has an addressable RGB header as well. And it basically has 3 little holes over here. And that's going to be connected right in this addressable RGB on this motherboard over here. We have several over here. We have a total of 3. So the good thing is that we have one right here that we can just connect. And so we connect that right over here. And this was responsible of controlling the RGB of all of the Arctic VRM and these fans as well. So now that we have everything connected, all these cables look really horrible, of course. So I'm going to push this out of the way just a little bit so I can push these cables right inside, because I don't like to see those cables. All right, and after that, we can go ahead and attach our VRM cover. Then I could play around these cables later, but I think that looks a million times better. So moving on, our next major cable is going to be our motherboard 24-pin connector. And this is the easiest one to spot because it is the largest one as well. So that's going to go right on here, which is also 24 pins. So we just need to just bend this in and plug it right in. Make sure you plug it all the way through. All right, we have the motherboard plugged in. Next one here is going to be one of our USB headers over here, and reference the motherboard over here, and that's going to be labeled as JUSB-C1, which is going to be right over here. Now MSI has it located right here from the right direction here, so you have to connect them. Now the H9 Elite is a little bit trickier because it has this little bar in the middle, so there's not a whole ton of room to squeeze it in, but we're going to make it happen. All right, so I had to move this cable more downward. These only go one way, so make sure you have the right orientation. All right, and then just push that right in. All right, got that pushed in. And by the way, just in case if you're wondering, this one is a 12-volt high power cable that gets connected to the GPU. This is why I am ignoring this. All right, next thing we have is our next USB connector here, which are going to be these larger USBs here. So we get 2 of these, and you can put them anywhere, whether that be the bottom one or the top one. Now make sure you face this little notch piece upwards, and I am going to plug this in to the right. Now this cable on this H9 Elite is very hard to put because, like I said, this bar is in the way. All right. All right, so with these 2 USBs out of the way, let's go ahead and tackle the final set, which is going to be this whole bottom row here. The first cable that we're going to attack is the front panel connector. Somewhere in there, they should have a label saying F panel to make it very easy to figure out where it is. It has a total of 9 pins with 1 missing. So the front panel connector is going to be located on the bottom right, and you'll notice the missing pin as well. So all you have to do is just match that missing pin and plug it directly on top. So just like that, should go in nice and smooth, and you can start tucking the cables here. Now, all right, next thing we're going to move is going to be the power connectors for the fans. Depending on how you have your fan set up, you may have a fan hub, maybe like an SL Infinity hub from Leon Lee, for example, where you don't really need to use these. However, I'm using the Arctic P12 fans on here, so they run on power. So there's 4-pin connectors, and we have a whole ton of system fan connectors here all around. And if you ever want to know exactly where they are, they're going to be labeled as system fan with the number indicator. And going by the highest number, we have a total of 6 scattered all around, with 2 of them being top right, and the rest of the 4 are going to be all in the bottom. So I can put these system fans on any one of them. So I'm just going to put this one right here because it's the closest one. This is number 5. And then for the last set, there is one over here, one right over here. So I'm going to connect this one. All right, perfect. Now we have both of these connectors. That basically sends power and RPM signals to these fans that you see here. Last thing about the fans is because they have RGB, we also have addressable RGB headers as well, similar to the Arctic addressable RGB, which was located on the top right. There's only a total of 3 addressable RGBs. So we have one on the left and we have one on the right. They're gonna be in white as well, and you'll be able to see JRGB_V2 as well. And you just match up the pins. And then the final one. And like I said, every PC build is different. It all depends on what fans you're using. Final cable that we're going to attack is going to be the HD audio cable. Now those are always located on the bottom left, and you'll see JAUD as well. So this has a total of, same thing, 9 pins. However, the positioning of the missing pin is completely different from the front panel. That's one way you can tell. And you basically would just want to match the pins, and then you just drop it in. And then you can start tucking the cables all the way down. And that's pretty much it. Now the final connector that I do want to talk about are going to be the internal USB headers. We have a total of 2, which are located right over here. And these internal headers all depends on what type of devices you have connected. For example, if I had an AIO with the screen, I would most likely have to use one of these internal USB headers. In this unique setup though, there is no need for an internal USB header in my setup. Now the final thing that we have to do is plug in our GPU and power everything up. And the final thing I wanted to cover is the PCIe slot over here. Now this does have a locking mechanism here. Whenever you position your graphics card, push it in, and automatically the locking mechanism prevents it from being able to remove the actual card. So if you ever want to release it, there is a button right over here, and all you have to do is click on it. That way it comes out easily. All right, and here is how we're looking so far with everything installed. So far looking really nice in this all white build over here. We can see how the bottom looks. All right, so before we fire it up here, I'm going to show you the back here. This being a white motherboard, the back looks really nice with an all white case. Now obviously we want to make sure we power on our PSU and make sure you have at least a mouse, keyboard connected. Now the SSD that I have right now does not have Windows installed yet, so make sure you have a copy of Windows on a USB drive and put it in any of the drives. And on this one, I don't use Ethernet, so the Wi-Fi 7 antenna that's included is really nice and convenient because all you have to do is just push it in. Just like that, very easy and convenient. And of course, you will be connected to a monitor. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and fire this up. And as you can see, it has fired up successfully. Absolutely loving that debug zone over here. That's going to let us know exactly what is happening with the motherboard over here. 15 is definitely memory training right now. So all we have to do now is give it some time for everything to be registered, and we'll see what happens on the monitor. All right, in just under 2 minutes, you can see it automatically booted with the USB drive that I have on the back with the Windows, without having to do anything. This was very similar to the X870E, where it just booted right into Windows without having to do anything. I would have caught that in camera, but I was putting this front panel and repositioning the camera. All of a sudden, I noticed the monitor just turned on. So just like the previous X870E, I am very impressed with how easy and simple that was. So automatically bypasses the BIOS. Now, I did have the opportunity to hit delete to reach it, but things happen so quickly that I missed the chance. So right over here, I'm going to quickly set up Windows, and once I jump into Windows, I'll go ahead and jump into the BIOS and walk you through that as well. All right, so once everything installs and boots up, you will be greeted to this MSI driver utility installer, and it's completely up to you if you want to use this. However, it does feature some programs that are very useful, but a lot of bloatware, unfortunately. So there's a lot of things you could uncheck, but the most important ones that I recommend would be the MSI Center, and that's going to be your motherboard software to control the fan curves and the RGB elements. You also have drivers for the AMD chipsets, the AMD graphics, a couple of Bluetooth drivers. So it's up to you what you want to install, and we can hit install, and that'll take its time to install. Now, while that is happening, I'm going to bring up Task Manager. And when you're in Task Manager and you go to memory, you're able to know what speed it's running at. Now, right now it says 4800 mega transfers. This is going to be your standard speeds without overclocking your RAM. And in order for us to change this number to the advertised 6000 mega transfer speed, we are going to have to jump into the BIOS and overclock it. So I'll definitely be showing you that. For now, I'm going to wait for all this to download first. All right, now that we have everything downloaded, in order for us to jump into the BIOS, we do have to shut off the computer completely. All right, next thing here, you're going to power it on again. And as you're powering it on, you want to make sure you grab your keyboard and you start spamming the delete key. All right, and we just jumped into the BIOS, so let's go ahead and go over this real quick. All right, so this is the BIOS menu. It's called the MSI Click BIOS X, which makes things very easy to browse. And I like the fact that the resolution of the BIOS is also updated up to 4K. This is a 1440p monitor though, but previous motherboards had like a very low resolution, so I appreciate the fact that new motherboards are now coming with higher resolution. So now that we're here on the Click BIOS X, there are two different modes. We have easy mode, which is what you see right now, and then you have an advanced mode, which gives you more advanced settings here. However, the easy mode makes it very simple and easy to just do certain things with just one click. Starting with the top left, here we have a CPU gain boost here. So if you ever want to turn this on, you can literally turn it on, for example. Over here under MPU here, if you have a compatible CPU, you might be able to have this feature, but that's disabled for me. Now on the memory over here, this is where we get to overclock the RAM. And you'll notice on the right side over here, we have our DRAM. And right now we have the G.Skill, and you can see that they're being read as 4800 megatrans. So let me see if I can actually click on this here. So this gives us more details of the RAMs and timing. So right now it's at 4800 for both. And whenever you want to overclock it, they make it very easy. You just click on this little arrow key, and it can load up the first EXPO profile. Now EXPO is AMD, and then Intel's version is called XMP. Depending on which RAM you end up going for, sometimes it could be an Intel XMP, for example, and that is perfectly fine. EXPO is a lot easier for AMD. Now whenever you want to know exactly what's going on here, if you go up here under the I button, this will show us all the profiles that are loaded on the RAM itself with these timings, which are the advertised speeds of the RAM that you're buying. So enabling that allows us to overclock it, and I always recommend doing this after everything is booted up and you're pretty much golden. Now on the topic of overclocking, if you want more options under advanced, you can go down to overclocking, and over here you can go all the way down, and here you'll see more advanced options for those of you guys that want to do a lot of overclocking. You have all of these over here. However, if you just stick to the easy mode, that should be fine. Now, here we have the information, of course, of the motherboard, the BIOS version, and the BIOS version, which is pretty nice. And if you ever wanted to update the BIOS, they make it very easy with this little USB icon over here titled M Flash. As long as you have a USB drive connected under the BIOS, then you'll be able to utilize the M Flash very easy. So over here under Easy Config, we have more configuration options that we can toggle. We have X3D gaming mode. For those of you guys that have X3D chips, such as the 9800 X3D, you can definitely enable this with a simple click. You can just hit enabled and you hit OK. You'll be able to enable that. But for now, I'm going to leave this disabled just because I'm overclocking the RAM and I want to make sure that it is stable first before I try any of these other options. And then right over here, we have more switches that we can control. We have fan fail warning control. We have temperature units. So if you want to open up freedom units, you can definitely do that, and you can just basically toggle all of these over here. So other than that, for most of you guys, a simple overclocking the RAM is more than enough. And if you ever want to come back and try any of these, you definitely can. And whenever you want to save, you can just hit exit on the top right. When you hit exit, you want to make sure you save the configuration. So it's going to save the export profile, and then all I have to do is hit yes, and then the system will start to boot up. So I'm just going to push this more I'm gonna push this camera more to the left here real quick for you guys. Now, since we are overclocking the RAM, we want to keep in mind of this little LED debug zone. It's on 15, so it is doing some memory training, and this could take a while, but in my experience with the MSI X870E, the boot up was actually pretty fast. And for whatever reason, if it does not work, the motherboard should revert everything back, and if it doesn't, we have that dedicated clear CMOS button on the back, which puts everything back to factory again. So I'm just gonna let the camera roll and see how fast it takes. And you'll notice right over here, everything is running here. So it looks like the memory training is done, and we'll see if it took the EXPO. All right, and looks like it's taking the profile so far. We'll see if it boots into Windows. And the number you're seeing right now on the debug is reading out the temperature of the CPU. And just like that, we are booted up into Windows, and this is a privacy policy for the MSI Center. All right, so it looks like that's still installing, but real quick, I'm going to jump into the task manager, and then we're going to open up performance, and just like that, with a simple click, it took the 6,000 mega transfers, meaning that this RAM is now running at its fastest advertised speeds. All right, so for those of you that want to know how to adjust your fan curves using the MSI software, once you have MSI Center installed, you have the option to install all of these additional programs to add more functionality. So for example, Mystic Light will be able to control the RGB elements, whereas the Cooling Wizard will be able to control the fan curves and all that good stuff. So starting off with the Mystic Light here, once we set that to open, I have total control of controlling the RGB elements that are detectable by the motherboard. So you can see over here we have motherboard, and then we have the actual RAM. So I can control whatever's connected to the motherboard, such as the Dragon logos and all of the addressable RGBs that I have attached. Now these two are separate, so I can actually have two separate effects, or I can link them together. Now over here on the LED, assuming that you don't link everything, you have the option of customizing each one. Now we have the option for IO cover, and this controls the actual Dragon that you see there. So I can basically shut it off completely, or I can put custom effects here, such as, let's say, lightning, for example, and you see the little Dragon do little lightning effects here. And then I can also go to any of these addressable RGBs. We have 1, 2, and 3. So for example, if I click on 1, you can hit scan, and it should automatically light up showing you which one is which. I've already adjusted this though, so it's not really going to show it, but over here it's set to white. But if I go ahead and maybe change it to a pinkish color, actually no, hold on, it's really hard to see. I'm going to change it to a red. I think it'll be easier to see. So right over there, you'll notice the bottom 3 and the rear fan have changed colors, but the RGB on top of the radiator and the side fans remain the same color. That's because the first one is connected to those fans, and if I were to select V2, for example, that will detect the side fans, and I can specify what color I want on this one. So if I want to make this one yellow, you'll notice that they're yellow now. And finally, if I go to the last one, which is going to control the RGBs of the actual top fans, I can also set it to different effects as well. So let's say I want the same, let's say I want to do a meteor effect, for example. Now you'll notice that it runs that media effect. So this also allows you to save up to 3 custom profiles, or you can also, if I want the RAM to have its own separate color, let's say I want it to have a turquoise color, I can just hit apply, and now just the RAM sticks are now changed. Now you'll notice that there are RGB elements on the graphics card. However, because it is not an MSI graphics card, I won't be able to control it on this software. Now you could use third-party software like Signal RGB to control all of the lighting if you prefer. Now if you want everything to match up, go ahead and click on this little link option over here, and then you can go ahead and set any of these custom settings. And let's say I want everything to be white, I can hit apply, and it should make everything go white just like that. As you can see, everything is now white. So you can go ahead and customize those colors using Mystic Light. Now if you go back down to feature sets and you want to control the fan curves, that's going to be on the Cooling Wizard. So once I hit open, it's going to show all of the fans that are on the motherboard, and the RPMs are the ones that are detected. So here we have CPU fan, and this RPM, like I showed you earlier, is connected to the 3 fans on the radiator. Pump, it's going to be the actual pump inside of the Arctic freezer. System fan 1 is actually the VRM fan that we connected. And finally, these last 2, system fan 5 and 6, are controlling the rest of the fans, like the bottom 3, the sides, and the rear. Now at any time you can adjust any of these curves. So for example, if I want to adjust the curves over here, I can just hit on this little gear icon and set whatever fan curves I want. I could also run a fan tune, and I can also set it manually as well. And I can have the temperature source go through the CPU, the system, chipsets. They give you different options, and then you can adjust your fan curves accordingly, whatever you want. I've already adjusted my fan curves, so I'm perfectly fine. But you'll notice here that it also defaults to BIOS mode. So whenever you want to change it, just make sure you click on customize, and you'll be able to customize each of the fan curves. So overall, with my experience of the MSI B850 HTI, has so far been a great experience, and I can say the same exact thing to the X870E version as well. I really like the design of this board, and I think it goes really well with an all-white build, as you can see here. Absolutely beautiful. I really like the fact that MSI is also offering almost the same design elements, making this a great choice for those that might not need all of the X870E features. So for those of you guys that don't need all of the bells and whistles, then to be very honest, the B850 is a great choice. I want to give a huge shout out to MSI for sending out both the B850 and the X870E HTI Wi-Fi motherboards, so that way I can showcase to you guys, and hopefully this video was helpful for you guys. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Firewolf out.